I'd like to point out what we're learning about customers. In the boot camp, we are starting with a single boot camp participant, 60 of them. That's represented by a single blue circle. But in the interactions that we have, both in the boot camp and beyond it, the individual participants are connecting to one or more other sectors. One of the experiments that we're doing is seeing if they can connect to their own organization, helping the organization benefit from their project, whether it be LIHTC or small scale, using an example from their day job to learn and get feedback from the Shark Tank and the other panelists and really learn the skills of a pro forma so that the project in the day job is getting advanced or contributed to. So we start with the individual, they connect to their nonprofit organization. We also are getting connections to the other sectors. The public sector, an example, two bootcamp participants are connecting with a third small developer in Kalamazoo. And Kalamazoo, that person is connected to the public sector, Rebecca Kick, who is doing a complete redo of the zoning to enable small scale development. But she doesn't have the small scale developers. So while she's going deep in her silo and really working on the perfection of the zoning to enable it, she's got allies coming out of the boot camp that are starting to organize the small scale developers as a matter of doing their projects together. And that third developer, a little advanced, is going to be sitting on the review panel. So we're starting to see these connections happen. Also, another boot camp participant is working in Kalamazoo County and has high leverage with the funding community given his day job. He is bringing in the private sector financing perspective and expanding the focus to Kalamazoo County. All of them are looking at doing an open space around the issues for how to grow small scale development in Kalamazoo and Kalamazoo County, perhaps at the end of March. Even for the LIHTC folks, we're seeing folks who applied for credits that didn't get them or applied for other funding and aren't getting what they need. And they're able to then start looking at connections to other sectors to say, well, what do we do now? How do we do a large project that we're envisioning, but in increments? So the connections that are starting to happen in the cohort to organizations, to the public sector, and to the financing are really taking shape. And we're carrying and feeding for them as we can. Now, we also know that we learn something by looking at their customers. And so this is an example of the kind of detail that some of the folks are going into. The color coding here is the different customer segments that they have as small developers or doing their work, right? The residents, their crews, the tenants, and then we're also helping them measure the impact for each of those segments in this color coordinated way. So what we're starting to see is something similar to economic multipliers in that if you start to put measures to all these different customer segments, you start to be able to show the full impact or a more full impact or a more robust impact of projects in a community. And this can be layered in with a racial lens, with a local lens, whichever lens you want to highlight or reveal the impact by or to. Working at this granular level with metrics enables you to do that. So we hope to see some of this in our final presentations. Now let me just shift a second to our team. Our team for CEDAM and for CDAD is roughly half Michiganders and half National Resource people. But we also know that depending on the work, we can bring in other folks. It's easy in a team structure with this much rigor to introduce, for example, team members that don't do what we do already, maybe small developer training. We have some coaches and they're great. But for example, if we were to work in Detroit, there are other organizations that we could incorporate into our approach that could be delivering the training, but in an integrated way. So what's the core work of the boot camp? It started with an open space meeting and that asked the question, what's the state of real estate skills among Michigan's community development organizations and what should it be? This led to three things: new insights, right? We learned more about the unique needs of small groups in urban settings. We found out that there are a number of folks that are looking for help in what to do when their anticipated LIHTC or subsidy doesn't come through. And we saw that there is a need and a value for storytelling that helps build support for affordable housing beyond the usual suspects, particularly in today's political climate, with a quite organized resistance against it. So Tiffany Manuel's brought in as a result. She's in the syllabus. She'll be presenting in April and helping everyone how to reframe their work to make it a literal win-win, right? How do you frame the work so everybody benefits from the work, not just saying we're going to benefit the beneficiaries of the affordable housing? So these new insights worked their way into our syllabus. There were new partnerships, right? There was a focus on neighborhoods and the neighborhood perspective that led to 2 lessons about community and neighborhood participation from folks who we discovered in the open space and pulled into our team. And now they're presenters and they're mixing it up. There was a rural lending CDFI, Housing Assistance Council, that was a co-presenter. They've already been been approached by participants to see if they can do some work in counties, helping them. So new money coming in from the outside, potentially, as a result of these connections. And then finally, other connections. The story of the Transfiguration Project in Detroit, Joe Heafy, he came to the open space. He met with in a breakout with local folks from Detroit, and he confessed that, hey, he didn't want to do the Transfiguration Project necessarily, that the mayor of the time kind of made him do it, and that he's really interested in doing more small-scale development. And so these conversations are starting to happen with people in other neighborhoods that are potentially going to be able to work with Joe. What an unexpected, but these are the kinds of connections that happen in these open spaces. So we started with an exercise called Picture Michigan Places, where people literally started with the places that mattered to them, and they took pictures of the buildings that they loved or were trying to work on. And what it revealed is that you essentially have the missing middle already here. You don't need to recreate it. You just got to grow more of it. IncDev's STEP buildings are a catalog of about 52 building types, and we started to see that people are already referencing many of them. So we have a lot to work with. We need to figure out how to grow each of these, and what does each building type have with its particular challenges? What are the revenues and the configuration? What are the costs? How might we adjust some of that to make a viable fourplex in a neighborhood where rents are X? That is completely doable, and that's the kind of learning that we hope to see across the small-scale projects. We introduced the idea of 12 questions to, quote, get stuff done. Any initiative, any project, any program, there are 12 questions that the Agile movement has helped us identify as being central to being able to move that work, to get stuff done. They started using those questions toward their own work and have created working plans to put those insights into action. And this will also be revealed, the clarity and the rigor that just a couple of coaching sessions gets them to, I think will be revealed in the final presentations because, for example, just some of the reactions so far after working with folks, totally different than how I was thinking, much more clear in just an hour. It lets me see where we need to go. And I can explain our work a lot more easily to potential partners. As these plans get more detailed and start to be implemented, we're going to learn more, and capacity is going to be built to keep it going. So I want to shift to the potential for partnerships here. So CEDM's Bootcamp has amazing coverage. The circles here represent the number of people in the bootcamp from that place. So clearly there's a lot of folks from Detroit, 18. But we really, without necessarily trying, have a pretty good coverage, especially when you think about Housing North being 7 counties up there, we got a lot of coverage with just this somewhat random assortment of folks. If we wanted to more deliberately get coverage, we could do it because CEDAM is a membership organization and has connections to 200 organizations. So the network has been, obviously valuable to who's in the room and the range and breadth of projects and the ability to be able to work together. I think that potential is revealed by the kinds of things these people are doing in different places, and they're starting to see, hey, several of us are working on X. We could be working together in some ways. So this potential partnership from the community development side is a new. It's a revelation, actually. The other thing about partnerships, so starting with those community development organizations, right? That's one of 3 circles. An example with CIB Planning's work, they are working with the city of Highland Park and the city of Hamtramck. They've got government land. The Department of Revenue has given them money to try to get that land redeveloped because of the concern over tax base and the solvency of the municipality. They're an example of needing connections to community development organizations and small developers, right? And so even among our team, we are seeing the potential for private sector and nonprofit sector being connected to government. There may be other organizations like CEDAM, like CDAD, like the State Land Bank, who could also help this final connection, this connection to local government. But this is really positive. Usually we're in the position of starting with local government. And this is easier in some ways when you can organize the other sectors to approach local government. Local government is usually all but too happy to jump in when they don't have to do the heavy lifting of initiating something. So this is some real potential if we can find ways to invite in the public sector, and the State Land Bank would be a great intermediary for that, with its connection to state government, with its, it's a pseudo-government land bank, has an asset which does draw people, has the attention of the governments, could pull them in with the potential of the small developers creating the value that the municipalities need. Just to note some other projects or other ideas that are starting to take shape, and we'll care and feed them, and maybe they will mature. But the idea came up that there's the need for a heuristic in small-scale development. I had to look up the word, but basically, what are the steps and what are the questions at each step that we are all having as practitioners? Can we start to collectively crowdsource and map that so that we can give others a quicker start? And we can start to make links to the answers that we found or that we're implementing or what we know works. So the working plan format is an easy one in which to capture that information and convey it. There's an interest in the metric working group that I talked about, the different segments and how do we measure benefit to tenants, benefit to buyers, benefits to local supply chain, etc. We will flesh that out as we can in the small development track. The county housing strategy in Kalamazoo was something that I could see every place that is trying to have a housing strategy could be doing it more effectively by adding a small development track. They could avoid the analysis paralysis of yet another study, which is the pattern we see, and instead maybe try some small development to actually build some units and learn what it would take and how much of the local need might be able to be generated from homegrown small developers, how much, if you change the zoning, would allow even more, and what could innovative finance be doing to spur further. There's a huge potential for that, I think, in every county, and it's a no-regret strategy. Continue to do the affordable housing that you're doing, try to get the money that you need from the feds and the state, but open up another front. And so we'll see what happens with Kalamazoo County, but I think we could be partnering or testing, piloting ideas in every county. The Housing North team may be a place where some of that gets tested out. They're working at multiple levels and in multiple places. So they may be a good test. And then finally, the cash rehab problem. There are several small developers in Detroit who are starting to work together. We mentioned the example of Pierre, people in East Davison, Frederick Worthy, a few others. So there's a little bit of maybe a 5 or 6 member sub cohort that's working on how do we get out of the cash rehab trap, which allows us only to do one project at a time in a serial manner. And some of the financing options in South Bend are ways that we're looking at getting over that. So these are things that are happening as people do their own work, but they're finding common benefit in working together. And that learning is not only shared among them, but then can be shared broadly. So to wrap, what started as a simple training is now has the potential to produce projects and measures of impact that are broader than what we typically measure, and should be able to help us tell the story more effectively of how everyone is benefiting. The case of the fiscal solvency of some place like Hamtramck being related to the affordable housing production of small-scale developers is not an obvious play, but it could be a way to say, look, we all benefit from the small and the LIHTC projects in these ways. South Bend, Indiana officials, after 4 years of working on this, have said that small-scale developers taken together are the biggest single developer in their city. And I think that is a really eye-opening statement of the potential here. So we don't have to be the biggest developer in every place in Michigan, these small-scale developers. We just need to jumpstart them, recognize them, feed them, say that small development counts, and remove some of the barriers so that their work can be accelerated, so that we are bringing more real estate projects online. That it's not a competition between large and small, because usually these small projects are not looking for money. And if there are special financing arrangements, they're not done as grants. They're usually done as revolving loans, and they're from different sources of funding. So we could be opening two fronts, or opening a second front in creating opportunity here. And right now, for the rest of the boot camp, this is tied to using working plans as a sort of lingua franca, a common way to be able to talk between projects, see patterns, and act on and get real work done, not simply teaching concepts and stuff in the abstract. And by the end of the training, we'll be able to measure real world outcomes that were not the anticipated result of this training, but actually are going to result. And so future trainings could be geared more deliberately to produce these kinds of results even more robustly. We could triple or quadruple the kind of outputs that we are going to see here simply by people acting and learning and wanting to apply what they're learning to their daily work. So a lot of potential for new partnerships and helping these sectors connect to the point where every place in Michigan has a cross-sector team that has the right people that are needed to have the level of success and balance across all aspects and sectors of the projects to produce results in a way that would accelerate and create a flywheel effect.